Welcome back to Touring the AFC South. I am your host, Mike Patton. And on this episode, I want to talk a little bit about media. Of course, we aren't necessarily liked at all times, but we do have our battles ourselves too. Here to talk about that is award winning journalist and someone that really tells it how it is at all times.
At
Miss
all
Dawn
times.
Montgomery, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing just fine. I see you on the Twitter streets talking about a few different things or whatever, and I'm
hmm
like, okay, yeah, somebody done definitely made her mad
Well,
today.
I think it's one of those things where people know that I've worked in the industry. So generally, like I'll get like a message here and there, like, "Hey, have you seen this?" Or "Hey, did you happen to watch this during the game?" And I really haven't, been watching the NFL season. I just like after walking away from sports media earlier this year, I was just kind of like, I don't think it's for me anymore. But I do work with like athletic programs, various universities on like fan experience things because that was kind of what my sports media outlet was focused on was fan experiences as well as just covering the games, covering the players, covering like up and coming journalists and things like that because one of the first up and coming journalists that we covered was Taylor Rooks, and I mean look at where she is today, and literally she's a go-getter. So but fans favorite fan at the time was one of the first few outlets at the time that really did an in-depth interview on her and kind of put her story out there. So I just think it's one of those things where for me, when I'm in the Twitter streets, it's just like I'm gonna keep it real. You know what I'm saying? Because if you're really in the streets, like if you're in the hood, somebody gonna tell you the real. Like they're not gonna sugarcoat it. They're not gonna be like, I'm gonna spare your feelings. Like, no, I'm just gonna be 100 with you. And also another thing that I think most of my male followers are realizing now is I'm gonna give you a different perspective because maybe you don't know. So I'm not going to always assume that fans know these things behind the scenes, especially in regards to like media. But I'm going to educate you and allow me to show you that perspective or tell you, no, this is the protocol or this is how this goes. And actually accept that because I might not be there, but trust me, I've been there,
Right. Now, of course, can you give everyone just the extent of your experience so they can kind of get more familiar with you?
Oh God. So first of all, most people that have been following me on social media for like over a decade, they all know that I used to be a professional model. So I was in like hair campaigns, I was on billboards, MARTA buses around Atlanta for a jeans company. I modeled for T.I.'s clothing line for a couple of years. One of my billboards actually got protested and brought down in Newark, New Jersey by the infamous Cory Booker at the time, but that's a whole nother conversation. So it's kind of like I've always been that person, no matter what industry I've been in, to kind of push against the norm. And so when I walked away from modeling, I just was like, at the time I was a housewife and blah, blah, blah. And then eventually like football season rolls around. Football is my thing. Like it would be every weekend, me grabbing all the kids because we were a blended family. So I had my kids and then his kids. I'm like, hey, let's go to Clemson or let's go over here to University of Tennessee or let's go to this HBCU this weekend. Let's go to South Carolina or something, like just getting on the road and showing them different experiences because they weren't raised that way. But I was like my mom, every weekend, we were either somewhere at a ball game or we were sitting in front of a TV watching ball games all day long. So this is something that has always just been inside of me. And at that time, while married, I just decided I was going to create like this fan experience blog because nobody really talks about actual fans. And I wanted it to actually be cool to be a fan in the sports media industry because a lot of reporters are actually fans if we're going to be 100. They can't admit it. They can't say certain things or they can't, tweet certain things because of they have to be unbiased. But for me, it was like, okay, but what if you actually had people who either went to school for communications and journalism or who had those media backgrounds and actually just kind of pivoted and became like a super fan. So I
Right.
created that and it just flew. You know what I'm saying? Like it, I would travel with College Game Day whenever they came in the southern region to kind of do shows here. So we would be there consistently for things like that. Built a relationship with various people, big names in the industry. And it was one of those things where most of those people were like, who is this girl? Who is she with? So, so for over like roughly, because that's kind of started about 2012. So that's like 10 years, you know what I'm saying? Where it's like consistently building these relationships and doing the things. And because my outlet ended up becoming more mainstream, which we know that kind of means more covering Power 5 schools and things of that nature, I built an alliance with HBCU Game Day. And Stephen was so open with working with me because I learned how to get credentialed to games. So when I started learning how to get credentialed to games, I'd reach out to him and be like, hey, this HBCU plays this Power 5 school, or they got a pay for play game, to get this check over here in this other conference. Do you want me to go cover, or do you want to send somebody there and I make sure that you all get the credential or I get the credential? And so when I learned that, I was like, oh, bet. We're going to start putting more Black and brown people up in here, like putting that through there. Because after a while, it was like, okay, I didn't want to always be on the road. I didn't always want to, cover games and things like that. And most people, that's kind of what you have to separate the actual journalists and the fans that are journalists, right? Because there are some people who always want to be seen or always want to be there to cover the games, when necessarily I feel like, especially if you're Black or a brown person in this industry, it is your utmost duty to find a way to bring one or two other people into those spaces, And I was consistently walking around with people. Eventually, I started, there were more, I would be honest, there were more white and Asian people that started trusting me and seeing what I was building, who wanted to work with me and start with me and kind of see how things would go and then go from there. And they start doing their own thing. And there's no problems with that, because they're going to go far, like think of the privilege that they have to build a platform and somebody throw money at them. But someone like me, I'm like, I wasn't being discriminatory of not working with them. It was just, if you're going to come in and you're going to learn how I do things, one of the main things I want you to take to your business is hiring a more diverse audience or more diverse voices to kind of appeal to that type of audience. So it's been fun. So it's been like 10 years. I've covered 5 Super Bowls. I've covered Penn State relays, twice. Anybody that knows anything about Penn State relays, they know that generally you get introduced to up and coming Olympians in the Americas. And so it's like, it's one of those things where you find out who is going to be the next person and things like that. So that's an exciting event. I've covered national championships. I want to say maybe 5 years in a row too, 5 or 6 years. No, actually it's been around since 2015. So 7 years. Yeah. 7 years. I've covered it every year except for maybe one. So yeah, 6 or 7 years doing that. And then it's just like people will always like question, like if they saw me, like they knew I was there to work, but it would be like, well, who is she with? And generally I'm either working with Black press now or I'm there by myself. And I've earned that right to kind of just like really stand on my name and kind of like reach out and say, hey, I've covered this before for these outlets, but I want to do something different or have a different angle I want to cover. And I can go from there.
Yeah. I'm hoping everyone is listening and paying attention to the extensive, things that you've done and the lanes that you've created.
Yes, I'm pretty sure I left out a whole gang of other stuff. We don't have time for it.
All right. Well, I brought you here for a particular reason. I wanted you to talk a little bit about NFL, but of course, specifically, we're going to talk about the media, and we're going to talk about a particular incident that happened in Tampa Bay. Now, for those that aren't aware, Giovanni Bernard is a running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he's been injured all season, most of the season, but he played in the game versus the Cincinnati Bengals this past week. Of course, they were up 17-3, ended up losing the game. After the game, of course, he's leaving the locker room. I guess no one asked him any questions or anything or whatever. Then all of a sudden, a few reporters are like, it's like they're hunting him down in the locker room. He turns around. It's almost like he's like, what is going on? He had he had that look like, okay, what is this? And then he gets the, along with them trying to ask him questions, they're chiding him for being injured all year. So to me, watching that was very cringeworthy. What was your first reaction when you saw that interaction between media and Giovanni Bernard?
My first reaction was, how could they be that disrespectful? And I immediately kind of turned on my reporter hat, because then I was like, who on the communications or PR team for the Buccaneers didn't stop that? It's almost like we know that in those locker rooms, the PR people for the team or the organization or communications team for the team or what have you, they're in the locker room. They're managing media. They're able to say, okay, you can ask this question, you can ask that question, or you next, or you can't do that, or blah, 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 right? And you don't see until after he actually turns around and settles himself to actually give the actual interview to them, before someone from the Bucks says, okay, now just go ahead and just ask your question, to hurry them up. My biggest gripe that I do generally have about this entire scene, right, is that there's a woman who's being attacked single-handedly because she posted the video. Now, granted, she shouldn't have posted the video because it wasn't going the way that she thought it was going to go, because it was almost like I'm getting down to the story. But no, girl, that's not what you were doing. But my thing is there's a whole one or two male voices that were supporting her. There's one guy that I know is to the left of her that was leading this attack on him. And if it were me and I was recording this and I was dumb enough to share this, I would have panned over to get his face real quick.
Right.
To make it seem like if I'm doing my job, then there's other people in this group that's doing the same thing too. And I've tried to find different angles of that video, and nobody else has released, because normally if something like that happens, you can find, oh, somebody was behind him and they got this angle, and so that's the guy who was next to her, right? Mm-hmm. There's nothing. They're literally allowing her to be the person that catches all the heat. And trust me, she deserves it. All the heat. No snowballs, fireballs thrown at her, because she was wrong. But the biggest thing to me is that in that instance, one thing that I would have asked for her to do, honestly, was to name the other press members who were doing the same things that she was doing. Because at the end of the day, being a woman in sports is already hard. But if you add on to that, if I'm a Black woman in sports, oh my God, hell, right? She's a white woman in sports. She has privilege. You know what I'm saying? So that's why she felt dignified in posting something like that. And then even in her apology, it was bull. You know what I'm saying? And I get maybe there's a level of accountability that you can read in her apology. But my biggest thing is that your apology needs to be as loud as your disrespect. I've always been one, if you do something to me, I'm talking about me. If you do something to me and the whole world gets to see it, you need to apologize real big. You know what I'm saying? The whole world needs to see the same thing. I want a billboard. I want my apology on the next martyr passing by. You know what I'm saying? It's one of those things where, baby girl, you said you apologized to him. Now, mind you, I don't think she would lie about that. But to me, you know how reporters tend to be, especially if they have certain relationship with players and they work with a team organization. They can ask them to do a selfie video. They can hold a phone and be like, hey, I just want to do a video. And you can do this after you've apologized to him, just to kind of express that you want to let people know that you talked to him one-on-one. There's so many ways that she could have handled this after she decided to post that cringy video of them attacking him. But I want to know who the men are. I want to know who the men are. I want somebody to say, this is Buddy, who was right next to her saying X, Y, and Z, because I'm gonna need them to catch some of this heat too. You and I both know.
He actually, I think he apologized too, but I still don't know actually who he is or where to go find him. That's my point.
We don't know who he is or what outlet he's with, and it's just a general statement that was pushed out because she said he apologized. We don't know who he is. Who is him?
That's true.
So, but the overall thing here is just this man. He wasn't available all season. Yes, you want to point out that now you're giving him time to talk to the media, but this man wanted to go step outside and speak to his family. This man is an actual human who he made a mistake, and he might have needed to take some time to deal with that. And one of the things that I pointed out that most fans were kind of like, oh, they can do that, was I said in one of my tweets, I was like, and the biggest thing about this is they didn't have to attack him right then and there. When he said that he didn't really want to talk right then, they could have been like, okay, well, can we catch you later? Can we catch you outside of the locker room? Those type of things, right? And then two, we're going to be real reporters here. They generally have a press conference the next day. So on Monday, you could have asked this man separate questions, or you could have requested to talk to him the very next day if you didn't catch him immediately after the game. But there's also other players in the locker room that you can interview in the event that this man needs space. Like, give him the space to go deal with his family or go deal with every, immediate game emotions that he may have afterwards, because he knows the press is coming. Like, you see it in his face. He's just like serious? And it's coming from everywhere. And his body language alone was something that they needed to respect, because you're in his space, being disrespectful, and you thought you were doing your job. That's not your job as a journalist.
No, not at all. I mean, honestly, just watching it, I watched it a couple different times, and I couldn't watch it anymore after that. But it was just, I was just like, and then there's a different way to approach him. Don't just go grab the man. You can grab the man and turn him around, but no. Why don't you walk up to him? Hey, Giovanni, I'd like to ask you a quick question, maybe about the game or anything like that. You have a few moments, something of that nature. Not just walk up to him and just, hey, you haven't been playing all year. You should answer these questions. You want us to ask you questions then? And I was like, wow. I was like, this is just really disrespectful.
No, you're not doing him a favor. How about that? And I mean, in the midst of her apology, I did read it. I didn't want to read it because, number one, it was long. And I was like, girl, ain't nobody gonna read it. But my thing was it was like, in being in media, you can't necessarily speak on things if you have not taken the time to take a look at it or watch it or review it, and then come up with a sound opinion about it. And just for me, it's like, even in the midst of apologizing, she centered herself. Even in the midst of apologizing, she tried to make it seem as if yeah, I'm apologizing, but I shouldn't have to, because you all need to understand I'm doing my job. Still, that's the underlining theme in the apology. And to me, that's not an apology. So it was just like, when I saw that, I was like, no, see, that's not it. And if we are going to hold players, team owners, front office staff or teams accountable, we have to really start holding these journalists accountable, because when they do these things, it's almost as if they make it seem as if the players are obligated to talk to them, and they are not, unless they have been pulled for press conferences, unless they have been pulled to speak to them specifically. If I'm in passing and I'm trying to get up out the locker room, I ain't got to stop for you.
Right.
I just keep it moving. And then you'd be online dragging me for that. And then I'd have to come out and say, well, this is what the real situation was. But in my opinion, it's like, he handled that so professionally. He handled that so gracefully, because the way I would have still walked out of there and then maybe circled back, or then told them, oh, I'll see y'all tomorrow at the team press conference tomorrow. Ain't no way in hell.
Yeah. It was very interesting, and I definitely enjoy getting your take on that one. And definitely for those that are aspiring to do media or thinking of doing media, watch that and just kind of understand things you don't do. Even if you don't are angry or upset or whatever, still respect the player and the person themselves instead of treating them like they're an object, because it really was bad. And then we have a comment from the touring the AFC South inbox from Bobby Warren. He said, "Amen. As a former journalist, a lot of them think they are God's gift to creation."
I mean, if that's facts. And then it's like, they also act as if their credentials cannot be pulled, because that's another thing for me. I don't care who you work for. If I was in this is another reason why I'm not in this industry, because it's just a lot of stuff I just wouldn't let slide. But if I was in the communications, I'd have been like, baby girl, you have to sit out the next 2 games because you have no locker room access. You just have to be in the press conferences. You know what I'm saying? Because again, you have to also know that you earned a right to be in those spaces. That's their private area. It's a locker room.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going
right.
up to this player, like you know, in locker rooms, they generally are changing. They're generally like, you see shit you ain't got no business seeing. You know what I'm saying? Tell me you're going to attack the one person who's trying to step outside to kind of maybe cool off and talk to family, and you're gonna bring up his injury. You're gonna bring up the fact that he owes you something because he's been injured all season, girl. And guys, get the hell up out of here with that. Don't do that. Don't be disrespectful, because honestly, if I were him, when she came up to me to apologize, I would no, going on. You good? Bless you. Going on. I wouldn't listen to nothing. She wouldn't have been able to tell. She wouldn't have been able to say she apologized or did nothing online for me. Absolutely not.
I hear you. I understand. I definitely. Wow, we've already went 20 minutes talking about that. So, but yeah, I think we've kind of hit our time. But I want to thank you for coming on. We definitely are. I'm definitely going to bring you back, of course, because we do have some more to talk about. Of course, you know, we do have some more to talk about. We'll talk about the last thing you sent me today. We'll definitely bring you back to talk about that, of course. But I want to ask you a few questions. Of course, I do have a game I always play in my show. It's 5 questions, 2 answers, and 1 choice. So, are you ready?
Yes.
All right. Modeling or doing journalism? Which one would you, if you had to choose one to do for the next 5 years, which one would you do?
Modeling.
Okay. All right. Now, interviews, post game or pre-game, which one do you enjoy more?
Oh, that's tough. It's like you catch them before the stuff happens, and then you want to talk to them after. It's like, actually, I'll say pregame, because you get the more optimistic, like, yeah, this is what we're gonna go do, and blah blah blah. Because generally, sometimes in post games, it'll be like, it'll be real bad.
Right.
Unless you're somebody like, rest in peace, Mike Leach, who was gonna give you a good interview no matter what time you put a mic in front of his face. But yeah,
right. Now, of course, I'm going to ask you this one: interviews or media exclusive? Which one do you think are better, or which one do you enjoy more?
Always media exclusives, because my thing is as a Black journalist, it's important for these players who look like me to really pick up the phone and say, hey, I got something for you, or hey, I want you to break this, as a source or what have you. Like, I think that's so crucial to kind of just pivot the privilege that seems to seep into journalism as a whole, but specifically for sports media. Like, we know there's generally 1 or 2 white men who they get everything and it's pushed out. But in certain spaces, what I've learned, I mean, shouts out to Sheena Quick, who covers the Carolina Panthers. She's been one who has been consistently breaking, news, and, players have given her media exclusives. So I think that that's uber dope. And I feel like more players should find those Black and brown or minority and overall journalists that they can reach out to, so that they can help build their own platform and their names in this industry.
Yeah, definitely. Sheena is definitely one to watch. And I keep telling people every time she drops anything, hey, you need to be following her, because she gives you the real deal.
They question her to the death, but they won't question the Adam Schefter or nobody like that. Like, come on.
Right. I don't get it. But all right. Now I'm going to ask you this one: sports or the political realm? Which one do you enjoy talking about more?
And I do both. God. Oh God. Oh God. Oh my God. Oh my God. I can't say both. I'm gonna gonna say sports, and I'm gonna say sports just because even though I walked away, I'm still in these conversations. So, and even with my role now more in communications and marketing and things like that, and press strategy, like even with the past 2 elections here in the state of Georgia, like working on that side of things instead of being the journalist interviewing, candidates and people like that, being on the other side of things, I'm still, well versed in the conversations that are being had around those things. But I will say sports, just because a lot of times when people leave an industry, you think sometimes they may not know something, when generally, like, I be knowing everything.
Yeah.
Even when I want to know, I'm like, why would you tell me that? Like, now I'm finna post something. Like, you know what
I'm saying? Right. Now, this last question, let's see. If you got to cover, let's see, the Celebration Bowl or the National Championship, which one would you choose? You had to make a choice.
The Celebration Bowl, because I've done both. And the national championship game is on a grander scale. You got Power 5, teams and schools and stuff like that you probably wouldn't get a chance to do on a regular basis. But I know for me, the joy that I see to see us in Mercedes-Benz Stadium here in Atlanta, the sounds, the smells, and when I'm talking about smells, I'm talking about shea butter, I'm talking about mustard oil, I'm talking about fish fries outside the stadium. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's different.
Right.
It's different. And I think for somebody like me who grew up in South Mississippi, I never knew that I could really work in sports. I love sports. I grew up in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where Southern Miss is. Yes, Brett Favre should be in jail. But I grew up in the South where football was everything. It was family food and football. And so walking around and watching certain people on TV, I didn't see me. Now, there was one Black journalist that I would see consistently covering sports, but he was doing that in our local hometown. You know what I'm saying? I didn't see that on a national level. So when I got older and I could create my own lane, that was important for me to do that. And also to kind of show other people you can find your way in. It may take you some time, but lucky for me, I already knew players. I already knew certain journalists. I already knew certain people who worked for certain teams that was willing to give me access to kind of like prove myself. And I just don't think that most of these younger journalists are appreciative of those spaces. And I feel like a Celebration Bowl itself for a young journalist is prime, like, this is where you learn to do it. This is where you learn to be great at it. This is where you come to really show, other young people in these different spaces that they can do this shit too. Because you don't have to just be a journalist. You can be the camera person. You can be the producer who's conducting everything on site or on the field. Like, there's other roles that we need to see more Black and brown people in this industry.
Right. And I haven't had a chance to cover a Celebration Bowl yet, but the biggest thing that I would say, and I do cover HBCUs, I actually have credentials to cover Tennessee State in football and basketball.
That's what's up.
But the biggest thing that I get is the sense of family. The sense of family. It's almost like, you seeing somebody, hey, what's going on? How you doing? Y'all sit there talking, catch up, and it's like everybody's kind of looking out for everybody. And you just don't get that sense anywhere else outside of HBCUs, in my opinion.
Right. And I agree. Even with my first time working with the college football playoff and committee itself, and working with like their social media team back in 2018 for the national championship that was in Atlanta, like, I was one of maybe 2 Black people that was on that team. And the girl who was running it, she was a young Black woman. But I know, like, she missed some cues, in general, you know what I'm saying? Where it's like, this is Atlanta. This is a city of culture. Like, this is a city of Blackness. And they're like, for you all to not know who some of these people are on the sidelines, like, that was mind boggling to me. And considering that I was older than some of these kids, it was like I was teaching them on site. And it's like, that was another thing for me. Most of these creatives who work social media for these teams, they're white, and they're taking on our voices or our culture to kind of perpetuate what they think fans want to hear and see. And a lot of times some teams miss the bar on that, and some teams get it right. But if you hired more of us, you wouldn't have to fake that. You wouldn't have to try to be inauthentic about that. So yeah, for me, it was like, it was a dream to really cover it with the playoff committee and not just as press, and to see behind the scenes. And I tell people that's an experience that I would like to see more Black and brown kids do, especially some from HBCUs who may not be able to cover the Celebration Bowl. Invite them to cover some of the playoff games or something like that with the college football playoff committee. Like, I think that would be uber dope. I've reached out about that because I saw another young woman who goes to an HBCU mention something like that, and I tagged, the person who was over, hiring social and, creative and things like that. So maybe it'll come to fruition. But that's one of the things where it's like, for me, even if your team doesn't even make it to the Celebration Bowl and you're at an HBCU, or you're a Black and brown creative at a Power 5 school or something like that, try to get you a credential to cover that, because it's real. It's you learn so much in that space and leading up to it, because people think you just show up for the game. And something like the Celebration Bowl, you've got press conferences, practices, hospital visits, or like community service visits and things like that. And you just learn how to be professional in these spaces. You can't just show up for the game.
Right. That's right.
Just show up for the game. You got to learn how to be a journalist in all of these spaces and really cover these things, because that's what helps build the coverage, and it'll go a lot further when you do those things. And people will look for you to come do it again, especially if you're professional.
Right. That's correct. That's correct. Well, we have reached the end of the show. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on and dropping a lot of knowledge and letting everyone hear. Just, we kind of brought a little bit more light to, media in general. That's what this show was entirely all about. Of course, we do, like I mentioned, we do have another one we got to talk about. I'll reach out to you about that one and try to see if we can schedule something there. But I just want to thank you again for coming on. I want to allow you to take the floor with all you're working on, where people can find you on social media. The floor is yours.
I mean, I'm existing. So I'm day to day, I'm working on any and everything. But you can follow me, of course, on Twitter and Instagram @ Dawn Montgomery. And that's about it.
All right. All right. Well, I thank you again for coming on. I want to thank everyone that tuned in. You've been tuned in to Touring the AFC South with your host, Mike Patton. You can find me on Twitter at Mike Patton 82. And of course, you can find Touring the AFC South on all listening platforms. We're out. Peace.